everybody. And Grand Rising.
Grand Rising.
That was our topic last year when we had our theme for 2024. And 2025, we're in this place of rising higher and growing deeper, right? That's that old adage and new thought, as above, so below. That as we grow and as we continue to cultivate both our inner life and our outer life, that as we continue to grow, we also deepen our roots. We also go deeper with our principles. We also go deeper to understand and to really walk out and live our values. Oh, I'm just really excited to be here for the first time.
Yeah.
I want to thank the Baha'i community. They've been so generous with us to provide a space for us to meet on Sunday mornings and to give us this opportunity to actually learn a little bit more about other cultures, other ways of being, other paths to spirituality. And so I imagine, while we're only here for a temporary time, while we continue to look for a spiritual home that can be ours, that we will expand, we will grow higher still, because we'll learn more about the Baha'i faith, and they'll learn a little bit more about religious science and centers for spiritual living. The theme this month is, you know what, I have to stop, because I have to thank all the people that got us to this moment. If you moved a box, if you went to the dump, if you brought things here for the service, if you negotiated a contract with me to rent space, any of those things, would you please stand so that we can acknowledge them? Because it does take a village, and I am so grateful for this community, for being flexible, for being adventurous, for being willing to step into newness, for being willing to, trust, right? I said last week that we will be walking by faith and not by sight. That's all right. We have, and apparently our media gal, Mary, needs some sight. So she's coming to church. Walk by faith and not by sight. I love that quote. You find it in Scripture, and I've seen it on, kitschy little posters and memes. But for me, what it means is that we dive deep into our faith. And we have a deeper trust for what is about to unfold for us, because we are in that liminal space. We have come here to be as a community here in the Baha'i Center, and we will continue to look for our permanent space. Now, as we work with this monthly theme of fertilizing our future, today we're looking at holistic growth, and I love that idea of holistic growth, because could you imagine how difficult it might be for anything to grow overnight? Now, sometimes if you're a gardener, sometimes it looks like that, doesn't it? Right? You go outside and say, there was nothing there yesterday, and now it's 6 inches tall. But holistic growth is that growth that we cultivate and nurture, that we take time with, that we allow ourselves to move with. And as we move as a community, we're moving through our own holistic growth. This community has been in several places in the many years that it has been formed as a community. We are 57 or 58, maybe 58 this year. Some of you probably know off the top of your head. We've been around the block almost as old as I am. So that's pretty amazing. And every place that we find ourselves, we bring us with us, right? we bring us with us. I posted a picture on Facebook about the move, and one of my colleagues, Reverend Dr. David Alexander, made a comment about how the spiritual home that we just sold, he says, it's a really good place, it had good vibes. And I responded, we're bringing our good vibes with us. And we have. I can see all the beautiful faces that I'm used to seeing on Sundays here with us today. And I want to wish you all a happy Easter. Or, as it was known before, the early Christians borrowed the holiday, Happy Ostera. Happy Ostera. So what was just like Christmas, the early Christians borrowed the feast days for their own use. And so before there was Easter, there was Ostera. And Ostera was the pagan celebration of celebrating Mother Earth and her fertility. And it was symbolized with rabbits for their fertility and eggs. And in the Northern Hemisphere, it symbolized the blossoming of spring. For the Christians, this was a time that they could use to commemorate the resurrection of Christ. And what I know about these mores and myths, and some call them truth, is that they are deeply embedded in our DNA. They're deeply embedded in our human culture. That when we begin to recognize these moments, these holidays. Holidays feels a little too light for what we're talking about today. When we begin to look at this idea of resurrection and this idea of renewal, it's powerful. It's emulated or actually communicated to us through nature, right? In the East Coast, where I came up, when our winters were barren, I had a beautiful little farmette, and it had lots of trees on it, and by February and March, everything was gray, and everything looked dead. And then suddenly, things would begin to blossom, things would begin to show signs of life again. And here in Southern California, what I've noticed is after the winter rains, our golden hills become green for a little while. We begin to see those signs of something that's happening below, something that's happening within the earth. And it's the same for us when we move through change. We may not see what we expect to see on the exterior of our lives when we're beginning to step into a time of change. But we begin to feel the stirrings from beneath the surface, right? Absolutely. You know, as a child growing up in this Judeo-Christian culture, Easter was less about resurrection and Jesus and more about finding that Easter basket full of goodies and candy, right? I had no idea about Easter and the deeper symbology of it, and I noticed that, and reflected as a young mother, I just carried on that tradition for my kids. I didn't sit down and explain to them what Easter was all about. No, it was all about getting to the store the night before, a lot of times, making sure I had goodies to put in their Easter basket so that when they woke up, they would do their little search and find their goodies, and then they'd have their sugar high, and then I'd be nuts for the rest of the day. And I'm pretty sure that my kids do that with my grandkids. And as I mature and I reflect on the traditions that I have witnessed in my own family, it's interesting to me how things get passed down, right? I can tell you that for my devout Catholic grandmother, Easter had deep meaning to her. She was a woman who came over from Europe with her family as a young girl, and really was deeply devout and Catholic. She went to church every day. She did not drive, and my grandfather made sure she lived within walking distance of church so she could go every Sunday. And so Easter was of real significance to her because of the resurrection of the Nazarene. And this idea of renewal, well, I'm really appreciating, I would love to tell you that last year when we were looking at our topics, we said, let's sell the building between Good Friday and Easter. We'll have our own death, and then we will resurrect in a new space. But honestly, this is the result of spiritual practice. It's the result of this community cultivating and continuing to grow and evolve to our next yet to be. And so here we are on Easter Sunday, renewed and resurrected as a community in the Baha'i Center in San Clemente.
Right on.
Yeah. You know, it's beautiful when you really think about it and when you really look around you to notice the renewal that is happening year after year. It happens in our own lives. It happens in nature. Certainly, if you've been on the planet for a little bit of time, you've had your own deaths and rebirths and renewals. You've had your own experiences of moving through change and transition. And I really appreciate Easter because it reminds me of the power of stepping into uncertainty, and that is the metaphorical meaning behind the resurrection story. We step into uncertainty. We really don't know what's on the other side. You know, the Nazarene, last Sunday was Palm Sunday, where we talked about this man who walked in with great joy and celebration and expectation, and the crowds and throngs that were throwing palms at his feet were thinking that they were celebrating the return of their king. And yet, Jesus knew it was something more than that. That what he was walking into was the shedding of his earthly form so that he could transform, that the energy that he was could transform into his next expression. And that is the message of Easter for those of us in New Thought. It isn't about the Savior who has come to, wash away our sins through his death and rebirth. No, this holiday, this Easter sacred time is to remember that Christ within us and to allow it to be renewed within us, in our minds, in our hearts, to remember that we are so much more than flesh and bone. That we are so much more than our job and our families and our homes and our cars and our bank accounts. That we are God-informed, that God loved itself so much that it expressed itself as each one of us individually. It individuates itself as all humanity is. I mean, I was thinking about it, it's not just thousands, not just millions, but billions of individuated forms of life that come out of the one spark that is the divine. I like to call the divine, one of my favorite names for the divine, the thing that makes
the grass grow.
Right. You cannot, regardless of what your upbringing is, your relationship to a power greater than yourself, you cannot deny that there is something that gives life, that expresses itself in so many amazing ways. One of the things that really, and I've shared this before, I had a little problem with Jesus for a while. And it had more to do with the projection that I was experiencing in the culture than it did the actual message that the master teacher brought forward. And when I reconciled that, and began to understand and to study and to really begin to know the historical Nazarene, the historical Jesus, I began to really love this guy that was so passionate about his love for God, and so passionate and absolutely knowing without a shadow of a doubt that every being he came in contact with was God in form. He knew that the kingdom of heaven lived within each human being that he met. And he was a champion for the underdog. He was a champion for those that were sick or poor. And he was outraged as a Jewish rabbi to find that his colleagues, the people that were also working with the congregants, the members, the people who were going to synagogue, and temple, he was absolutely enraged that they would try to tell the poor and the sick that they could not have access to God. Now this was a man who invented diversity and inclusion, if you ask me.
Yes.
He really began to help those who had been turned away, who had been shunned, to understand that God loved everyone, not just a few. And so as I look at this idea of resurrection, it gives me the opportunity to notice that we too have an opportunity to embrace everyone. We are a teaching that espouses oneness. And oneness can be challenging when we are othering.
Yeah.
Do you know what othering is? Right, othering is when you only see the differences and you don't see the commonality. Othering is when you see a difference, and I'm guilty of it myself, when I see somebody who's different and I judge it to be inferior, or I judge it to be something that I don't like, or sometimes I judge it to be even dangerous. But when I come to this philosophy, I am reminded that we are one, that we are all come from the same spark. We all come from that same place that makes the grass grow, that beats our heart, that keeps the stars aligned in the sky. All of it is absolutely an expression of the divine. And there may be times when you don't feel like an expression of the divine. There may be times when you're feeling less than. There may be times when you're feeling like you're not worthy. And so let this opportunity, this renewal ceremony that we're going to partake in, let this be an opportunity for you to remember and reclaim the power of the divine that so loved itself, it created you, and you, and you, and you, and you, just exactly the way you are. There are no exceptions. Oneness, it's not oneness and. There's no other words after oneness. It's oneness. And so as we look at this beautiful teaching of the master teacher that came to remind us of our oneness, we can bring that forward for ourselves. I have a colleague, Reverend Elijah Christopher, and he wrote this about resurrection. Easter, with its profound message of resurrection, can symbolize renewal and the possibility of new beginnings. The resurrection story reminds us that even in the face of adversity, there is hope for transformation and growth. This theme encourages us to embrace the concept of renewal in our own lives. And just as the earth renews itself with each passing season, we too can experience personal resurrection by letting go of past burdens and embracing new possibilities. And I really feel like when I read that, I was Light, I just see that on a personal level. I see that in our community. I see that in our township. I see that in our country. I see that in the world. That there's a lot of change happening right now, and we have an opportunity to embrace newness. And we may not be so sure what that looks like. That seed may be in the ground, germinating as we speak. We may not know how it's going to blossom. But if we remember that we walk by faith and not by sight, and we remember our principles, that bigger picture, that there is no death, there is no sickness, there is only transformation, that everything is energy, and that energy can never be destroyed, it only changes form. I was, as I was thinking about renewal, resurrection, and the crucifixion, and all of that, I was reminded of the Sufi poet Rumi, who, when he was getting ready to pass, referred to his upcoming death as his wedding day. He knew that he was going to be stepping into something new, some new expression. And so whenever we find ourselves in that place of change, what might feel a little chaotic, anybody on the team have a sense of chaos? Yeah, when we're stepping into change, you should have been here at 8:30. Yeah, when we're stepping into change, it might feel chaotic, but if we can rely on this deep truth, Ernest Holmes had these declarations of principle. Those of you who are familiar with our philosophy know that there are 12 statements and principles that the founder of Centers for Spiritual Living, Ernest Holmes, made, and one of them I thought was very poignant for today. And he said, we believe in the eternality and immortality and continuity of the individual soul forever and ever expanding. And if we can put whatever it is that we're moving through into that context of understanding that life is expanding itself through us, while it may feel chaotic, it's also an opportunity for us to release, to let go, and to step into newness. So before you see what looks like a kind of barren vessel here in front of us. It's got brown willows sticking out of it, and it symbolizes that place of unknowing, that liminal space where we're not quite sure what things are going to look like when we actually make it to the other side of whatever change or pathway we're on. And so this blossoming ceremony that I'm going to invite you to partake in, I actually first saw it at a Unity church, and they had a big symbol of a cross, and everybody was given daffodils, and everybody came up and they filled in all the empty space with daffodils, and it represented the renewal of Christ's consciousness within each person. And I adapted it because I think that this idea of blossoming and renewal also needs to represent the diversity of that blossoming and renewal. And so as you walked in today, hopefully you picked up a flower, and if you didn't, the amazing Tony, who read my mind, has a carton here of some flowers that you can grab. And I'm going to invite you to think about a situation that you might be in personally, where you might be in some personal change. Maybe it's, we sold our building. Maybe that's a big thing for you as well. Maybe there's something else going on for you. So I'm going to invite you to think about and to contemplate for a moment what it is you'd like to be free of, what it is that you would like to let go of, so that you too can blossom. And I'm reminded of this great little quote, you've probably heard it, by Anais Nin, came when the risk to remain tight in the bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom. And so my invitation to you is to consider what is it that you would like to risk, to let go of, to allow your, whatever you're holding tight in the bud, to blossom. And when you're ready, I invite you to come up and row by row and put your blossom in stem in the, there's a flower mixture in there that you can stick the stem in. And we will create oneness out of diversity, out of all the things we're getting ready to blossom in. And so let's just take a moment, go within, and Henry will play some music. And Tony will make sure you have a blossom if you need it. And so when you're ready, come forward. I can't hear that. But the acoustics are amazing. And I just, if you will behold from the many, from the individuals, comes this beautiful, diverse creation. And this is the world we live in. This is the possibility that we have for the world that we live in. We can live in a world where we each bring our own gifts together and can create beauty and peace. So as we complete our time, our sermon time, if you will, I invite you to take these ideas with you, this idea that diversity comes together to create the one that is so much more than we can imagine. That when we give ourselves, when we surrender our old ideas, our little human ideas of what we think our life needs to be, that something greater can come about if we continue to walk by faith and not by sight. Thank you very much. Sharing time with spiritual mind treatment or affirmative prayer. So join me if you will. Knowing that the power and the presence of the one infinite reality that is forever recreating itself in form. Recreates each one of us. Not just when we're born and when we pass away from this form, but in all the increments of our life. We are recreated over and over and over again. And so I know for each one, as we represent and remember this deep possibility about ourselves, this potentiality that lives within the human form, that we walk through any change, any transition, any seeming chaos, we simply stand in our truth as eternal and immortal beings. It is our immortality that defines us, not our mortality. And so I know for each one that we remember this as we walk forth, as we allow this reawakening to happen within ourselves this day, as we mark this remembrance, this Easter Sunday. I trust that we will remember this day in and day out, and that we will help each other remember. When I forget, you'll remind me, and when you forget, I'll remind you that we are indeed love incarnate, born from one Creator, and forever living in the power and the presence of that creative life force. And so we give great thanks for this knowing. We give great thanks for this remembrance, this opportunity to renew ourselves individually, to renew our beautiful spiritual community, and to be those emissaries in the world for renewal as well. I give great thanks for this. I let it go. I surrender this word, and together we say,